The fact that Firewall was gone is, that in of itself is enough to like make the game playable. And I don't think the game was playable before Firewall's ban. Sync audio, sync audio, sync audio. Oh fuck. Expression. Well, Firewall's banned, and we can't complain about that. A is now, what, 3, so instead of it being it's more like which is exactly the noise the average duelist makes when they're staring down Double Buster, which I guess is going to be in the game again. What's going on, guys? It's T'Challa. Today we're going to be talking about the new ban list. I'll be giving my thoughts on it. I'll be looking at the pros, cons, and putting on a tinfoil hat and explaining why I think that this is an emergency ban list more so than a real ban list. So let's dive straight in and think about the pros about this ban list. Well, like I said, Firewall's gone. Can't complain about that. Can't complain about that. However, I don't think anyone would probably agree that Firewall was the root of all the problems of Master 04, the link mechanics, or the game, or anything to that extent. I think it's very fair to say that Firewall is a icing on the cake, a very, very thick, huge layer of icing that probably will give you diabetes by the time you're finished eating it, but icing on the cake nonetheless. And I think that Firewall's genericness and stuff like that will be sorely missed, but it's for the greater good. And I just want to say genuinely thank you from the bottom of my heart. I can't even begin to imagine just how difficult this was to get Konami Japan to approve of putting Firewall on the Forbidden Limited list. I don't know what goes on behind the scenes, but let me just tell you something, boys. It was not easy for Konami, EU, and US to get Japan to approve this ban. I can promise you that. So the second point, I think, is that the ban list here does enough to address the format, and I think it does enough to make the game playable, at least, and somewhat fun and interactive, so that's a positive, and I'm glad that I'll be able to enjoy the TCG to an extent. I guess this really depends on what your perspective is, but Sky Striker, I guess, becomes the best deck from this Fallout. And when I say best deck, you know, you might not agree about that in terms of its power and stuff, but if we look at the passing format and stuff like that, whether or not it was the most powerful, it is important to recognize that it does have the most numerical tops and it does have the most representation. So it's safe to assume that for a particular reason that Sky Striker was and probably will continue to be as strong as it is, and this ban list only makes it a bit stronger. If you ever needed any kind of proof whatsoever that ban lists do not try and address problems and fix the format and make everything an even playing field, rather they are there to maintain profit and maintain a financial goal and drive for Konami, then this ban list is probably more than enough proof for you, because the very fact that Sky Striker was the most represented and dominant deck for the last format, to then receive no hits whatsoever brings the other decks down even further, and Sky Striker is just going to stay where it is. The gap widens and Sky Striker gets even stronger. I mean, I'm sorry, but the most ignorant of duelists would have been able to tell you, hey, if you take away 0 cards from Sky Striker and take away like 2 or 3 cards from other decks, it naturally is just going to be stronger. So I don't know why the deck was left unaddressed, other than the fact that Savage Strike is coming around the corner and they probably want you to buy the Earth Link and stuff and make it good in your Sky Striker deck. And there's rumors that Sky Striker will get even more support beyond that with different attributes. I don't know how anyone can think that ban lists aren't there to drive profit, and if this isn't proof, then I don't know what is. But that's a side note. Let's look at the negatives about this ban list. Well, I think Bowden here summons it perfectly. It's a yikes from me. It's a yikes from me. I don't think anyone can look at that and read it and be like, oh yeah, that card is used for fair plays. I don't see how you can look at a card that can be triggered multiple times to hand loop you and think to yourself, oh yeah, this card is fair. Like, is the drawback supposed to be that you discard cards out of your hand? Well, you've made a board. Like, who cares if you don't have any cards in your hand? You've extra linked your opponent. It doesn't matter if you've discarded 4 cards. The point is you have a big board and your opponent doesn't. So to see this go unaddressed was very disappointing and very upsetting. I think their idea of addressing this deck was to just give it a whole bunch of consistency hits. Even though Gumblar decks might not be the best deck and maybe they'll just be terrible, I think they'll probably be relevant. I think they'll probably be good, especially with the new Neospace Connector card we're getting. I think that Gumblar is a card that should have been banned, and I don't see, like I said at the start of this point, I don't see what you're using Gumblar for anything fair other than just, you know, hand-lipping your opponent for 4 to 6 cards. And Neo Space Connector is only going to further make that broken. There was a lot of consistency hits for combo decks with Arma going to 1 and Mali going to 2, but I don't think it's enough. Decks like the Rongo Bongo deck do not use Firewall, and Firewall definitely stops a lot of combo decks, but the most dominant one at the last YCS, at Pasadena was the last YCS, I can't even remember. Very recently anyway, that deck took about 11 top cut spots. That is a frighteningly large amount of top cut spots for a deck that literally says you cannot normal summon, special summon, you cannot affect this monster in any type of way, and if you set anything, this monster will destroy your entire field. I don't see how a card like this was ever designed and printed in the first place. It was only a matter of time before eventually one day something would be in the game that would facilitate and make this card absolutely insane. So that's the pros and cons. Now, emergency ban list is how I've titled this, and that's for good reason. I think that this is an emergency ban list because emergency ban lists tend to deal with the surface problems. They don't deal with the sort of inherent root issues of the game. And I think that there's a lot of things missing here. Overall, it's a great ban list. Honestly, like, the fact that Firewall was gone is, that in of itself is enough to, like, make the game playable. And I don't think the game was playable before Firewall's ban. So it's good to see that it's gone, but at the same time, there's very few hits here. The fact that Sky Striker wasn't addressed goes to show you that, again, the game is like profit driven and not really designed around balancing and tuning, because they would have been able to look at this and have the foresight to see that, yes, Sky Striker is still a strong deck. So it's a shame that that deck wasn't hit a little bit to bring it down in line with something like Altergeist and stuff, and even then you could argue Altergeist were probably past their time now and needed some kind of a hit. But that's what I think. It's a part one of a ban list, so they're going to neuter the combo decks now, and I personally think that they didn't even want to have a ban list until like closing into Savage Strike, but they realized that there's 2 more events, and those events are just completely unplayable if Firewall stays in the game. So kudos to them for banning it, but at the same time, it's very much like a part 1, because I think part 2, next year at some point, maybe February or so, they will have to probably address the Altergeist decks, the Sky Striker decks and stuff, and try and make way for new product coming way. So one other example that I like to bring up is back when Frogs, Meadowfoe, and ABC were the best decks near the end of 2016 coming into 2017. There came a point where those decks were just so dominant. It was really like the new triangle format. They were around for a while, like 4 months, maybe even 5 months, I don't know. And people started getting really bored with those decks around about December time, January time, and people kept calling for a ban list to hit those decks. Now, the issue here is that that's a type of hit that would have been completely unnecessary, because the very next month, Zoo was coming out, and that set in itself was a ban list of sorts. So if Savage Strike is going to be a ban list of sorts, this ban list would be justified in being so small and stuff. But the problem is there is nothing coming out in Savage Strike that's going to shake up the meta in the same way that Raging Tempest did, for example. That's why I think that this ban list is very much a part 1, and part 2 will probably come out closer to the time once they be able to get a closer developer look at Savage Strike and see how exactly it affects the meta, because I don't think that set really affects the meta that much. There isn't some big, heavyweight deck that's coming out of Savage Strike. Maybe Guard Dragons will be good, at least in the OCG. They've not done anything. Safe to assume that Guard Dragons probably won't be the top tier meta deck that you kind of think they will be when you first read them, but just looking at it purely in practice in the OCG, it's just not doing that well. So, like I said, if there isn't some big heavyweight deck coming out to neuter the current decks, I don't really see why this ban list isn't a lot more heavy. And that's the thing, the problem with this ban list is that it's not heavy enough and it doesn't deal with enough cards. There probably should have been some Sky Striker hits, maybe even Altergeist, hell, maybe even Thunder Dragon, very lightly, but hey, if you're going to neuter all the decks, then you might as well just bring everything down a notch. That's why I think it's a emergency ban list rather than a, actual full-fledged ban list. Ban lists have gotten really tame over the last few years. If you guys remember Dragon Blues, where, gosh, I don't know, 10 cards got banned, and here we are with like 1 and then like 2 more hits, and that's it. Like, thank you everyone for watching. Sorry for the long-winded analysis, but I wanted to be as in-depth and as meticulous as possible. So thanks for watching up until this point. If you have been watching until this point, hashtag #UnlockTheShock2019 in the comments. We'll get our boy back. Guys, we will get our boy back one day. Hashtag unlock the shock 2019 in the comments. Watch me on Twitch every single night at FarfaYGO. Subscribe, comment, like, discord.gg/Farfa, at FarfaYGO on Twitter, etc., etc. Wakanda forever.